this is Jen. In this video, we are looking at one of the most famous passages in all of English literature, which is the prologue to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. So I'll be explaining the context and purpose of the prologue to start with, and then I'll go on to analyse some of the key literary devices in this passage. This is going to be super helpful for those of you who are studying the play, so make sure you stay tuned for the next 5 minutes of close reading goodness coming right up. Now, the prologue to Romeo and Juliet is probably the biggest spoiler in the history of literature, because it basically spills all the beans about what's going to happen at the end of the play, i.e. Romeo and Juliet will kill themselves and their death will resolve the family's long-standing feud. So if you're looking for plot suspense, you won't find much in this play. It's interesting to note that Romeo and Juliet is one of the very few Shakespearean plays with a prologue, and it's the only tragedy with one. So why does Shakespeare give away the ending so early on? Of course, there are many reasons, but for starters, it tells us that the plot probably isn't the point of his work, especially since most Elizabethan audiences would have been familiar with the star-crossed lovers narrative, this being a popular trope stretching back to the medieval romances. And like many Shakespearean plays, the story of Romeo and Juliet is not Shakespeare's original creation. Instead, it is an adaptation of Arthur Brooks' The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet, which is a translation of an Italian poem. Brooks' work, however, was published by Richard Tottle, who was one of the most influential English publishers at the time, which further supports the argument that playgoers back then would have known the story fairly well. So if the plot doesn't really matter, then what gives? Most likely, Shakespeare wanted to emphasize the aspect of dramatization, which is the acting and the staging of the play. In fact, the prologue itself makes this very clear towards the end with a meta-theatrical reference, as it announces that the lover's tragic story is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage, the which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss our toil shall strive to mend. So the message from the bard for the audiences and for us is to pay attention to how they stage the story, which elevates the actor's role and shines the limelight on the Lord Chamberlain's men, which of course was Shakespeare's playing company. Let's now move on to close read the prologue, which contains some incredibly rich and textured language. As an overview, we'll be looking at the following literary devices. The first thing to observe is the irony of referring to the alikeness of the 2 households, which are the Montagues and the Capulets, of course, because their relationship is one of opposition and enmity, not a likeness. But the idea here is that they are actually more united than divided in their hatred for each other, which shows that despite the family's mutually combative stance, they actually share a fundamental bond rooted in human nature. This motif of conflict is then extended in lines 3 to 4, which reads, "From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean." There's the antithesis of ancient and new, which respectively modify grudge and mutiny. Now, placed together, grudge and mutiny are 2 words that connote an escalation of conflict. What's interesting, though, is that Shakespeare juxtaposes the ancient new antithesis with the antanaclasis of civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Antanaclasis, as some of you may remember, is the repetition of a word in different senses. And here, the first civil in civil blood refers to the civil war between the 2 family dynasties, and the word blood connoting bloodline and lineage, but also bloodshed and violence. But the second civil in civil hands refers to the refined nature of these aristocratic families. So the message that emerges here is twofold. First, the passing of time from ancient to new does very little to diffuse historical grudges. And second, underneath the facade of civilized sophistication, humans are at their core more primitive and violent whenever it comes to matters of conflict. By the way, if you're finding this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and also subscribe to my channel so that I can keep making these useful English lit study videos for you all. Next, in From Forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, in lines 5 to 6, the synecdoche of loins in fatal loins establishes both the biological and sexual undercurrents of the play. But more interestingly, the two lines reveal the contrasting irony of two families which hate each other, producing two children who fall in love with one another. So starting with the spoiler of Romeo and Juliet's suicide in line 6, this dramatic irony continues with the chorus telling us in line 8 that their death will bury their parents' strife. And this invites reflection on the nature of love in this play. While we often think of love as romance, love is actually at its core sacrifice, and specifically sacrifice at the expense of one's own interest, and in more extreme cases, one's own life. So if we pay attention, we'll see that Shakespeare is suggesting in this prologue that the greatest love in this play isn't actually the romantic passion between Romeo and Juliet, but rather the tragic sacrifice of two children for their parents. And this perhaps also explains why from lines 8 to 11, the predominant diction is familial, not romantic, with phrases such as their parents' strife, their parents' rage, and their children's end appearing in lines 8, 10, and 11 respectively. My final point relates to rhyme, and if you want, you can click pause right now and try scanning the rhyme scheme before returning to this video. So, if you've scanned it yourself, you've probably got something that looks a bit like this. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I always say when it comes to literary analysis, the devil lies in the anomalies, i.e. what sticks out is always ripe for analysis. So here you notice something odd happening in line 11. Unlike the other alternate rhyme pairs, remove doesn't rhyme with love. Strictly speaking, remove and love are I rhymes because they both end with the letters OVE. But they aren't sonic rhymes, so when performed or read aloud, we can immediately hear the lapse in the alternate rhyme scheme, diverging from the rest of the prologue, bar the final rhyming couplet of attend and mend. It's probably also not a coincidence that this lapse occurs with this specific pair of words, as the imperfect rhyme of love and remove mirrors the incompleteness of Romeo and Juliet's love, which is, of course, similarly removed by the cruel workings of fate and family. And that's it for this analysis, guys. I hope it all makes sense and that it introduces you to a new perspective on this very important Shakespearean passage. You can check out the links to my Romeo and Juliet blog post and videos in the description below. And as always, please do comment below with your thoughts, hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that I can keep making these English Lit Study videos for you all. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!